Welcome to Mothering from Within, the podcast where we dive into the heart of parenting during those magical yet challenging first few years. I'm Kaili Ets, a mama of two, a pediatric occupational therapist, and your guide on this beautiful journey of motherhood. Every week, we explore the wonders and hurdles of motherhood with curiosity, we gain clarity around our babies, and find the courage to trust our instincts. If you are a mama who wants to do motherhood your way, confidently, courageously, authentically, then you are in the right place. So grab a cup of tea, tuck those little ones in for a nap, or bring them along for the ride. It's time to get curious, gain clarity, and unleash your courage to do motherhood your way. A gentle disclaimer, please do not consider anything discussed on this podcast by myself or any guest of the podcast to be medical advice. The information is provided for educational purposes only and does not take the place of your own medical or healthcare provider. Hello and welcome to another episode of Mothering from Within. I am so excited to have another guest expert with us today. Her name is Tracy, and she is an occupational therapist, and she's also a professor as well as a mother. I would love to know a little bit more about you, Tracy, and sort of how you came into starting your business and whether that stemmed from your own mothering journey up until that point.
Thank you so much for having me, Kaili. Yes, so I've been an occupational therapist for almost 20 years, and also in the process of my professional development, I became a epidemiologist. So I have a background also in public health and community health. So I've had this journey of not only being an occupational therapist, but also working at an early Head Start program. And if you're not familiar with early Head Start, it's a federally funded program in the United States. So I'm not sure that it's everybody's familiar with it. And it really tailors to pregnant women and children 0 to 3. And that's when I really figured out that I was really passionate about prevention. And when I think about prevention, I don't think just about babies. I don't think about children 0 to 3. I was thinking how important it is to take care of the mother. And I think as occupational therapists, we deal a lot with the children. You know, we are providing intervention. We're thinking about our tools and our skill sets and sensory integration. Needing to sit with moms often. We were with them when their children were being diagnosed either with Down syndrome or with autism. And I became acutely aware how important it is to sit with moms and how important it is to recognize their experience, even perinatally, especially for moms who have children with Down syndrome. But it wasn't until I became a mom that it really all came together for me. I was also doing maternal health research at a healthcare institution. And a lot of the research questions that I was starting to ask were very motivated by my experience. I was researching exposures in pregnancy and exposures in early childhood. And then so I became really passionate about advocating for mothers' wellness. And I think personally, as a mother, I wanted to add that I really did have a journey in mental health, and I have two very unique experiences that I don't know if anybody else has had, but I know maybe related. I really did see myself from the outside experiencing thoughts and feelings of like rage, and that my husband and my baby would be better off without me. But it wasn't like I felt it. It was like I saw myself. It was an out-of-body experience of like, who is this person and why is she thinking this way? And why are those thoughts even there? And then the other thing that I experienced was I would have these mental images of, I don't know if you're familiar with the demonic head shake.
Oh, no.
Some movies have that. And it was me experiencing rage in my mind. It wasn't me experiencing rage in real life. It was more like I am overwhelmed and this is what my head is doing in my mind. And I'm just like stuck and overwhelmed. And I was just happy that I wasn't acting it out. So, those things were in my mind. Anyway, Our background in occupational therapy was sensory integration and sensory processing. Um, I was curious to distinguish sort of the social, emotional, cognitive strategies versus the sensory strategies. And I was thinking about it more from the children's perspective. So children are able to learn and implement social emotional strategies, but then sometimes they're not able to do that. So then we implement sensory strategies. And I realized that moms go through the same things too. We become sensory overstimulated and overwhelmed, and we need those sensory tools too to get us to a place where we can manage emotionally. And even as a professor, that's when I started getting even more in tune as to the physiological response, learning about polyvagal, and which I can talk about a little bit later, and just really making connections. And I have to recognize an author named Karen Moore is the author of the Sensory Connection Program, and she created this program, a curriculum for self-regulation in other OT settings like mental health and trauma-informed care. And when I was reading her work, I was reading my experience with mental health, and I thought, why couldn't we apply sensory processing strategies in motherhood? We go through similar mental health experiences exacerbated by hormonal changes, exacerbated by environmental changes. And I just really wanted to elevate that experience and how it's related and how we can support moms in that way.
Amazing. And I think this is such an important conversation and an important perspective, because this idea that moms and our overwhelm and our stress in daily life of mothering, that it could be related to the fact that we are actually dysregulated as a result of our stimulation from all of these sensory inputs that are coming into our brain and body, and that are kind of new to us. Like, we're being bombarded by sensory inputs that we weren't necessarily familiar with before, to the same extent as when we have a baby. And I think this is an important piece to consider that might be underlying our overwhelm, our stress, our feelings of mom rage, our feelings of, oh my gosh, why am I having these thoughts? Or, you know, I can't manage this, right? So there's a few ways that I want to kind of dive into a little bit more. I think probably what makes sense first is let's dive into just a little bit about the polyvagal theory and kind of talk a little bit about how our nervous system even relates to our daily lives. And then we can kind of dive into a little bit more of the sensory processing specific.
Yeah, sure. So when I was learning about polyvagal theory, well, first off, it's the way we react to our environments, how our body reacts. And more specifically, our vagus nerve controls our responses to these environmental cues. And the theory was described by Stephen Porges, and the theory has been, discussed a lot, and there's some contradictory information out there, but for the most part, it's a theory and it's very helpful. So the vagus nerve branches out into two general sides of our body. The first one is sort of towards the front of our body, and it's called the ventral vagal complex. And then we also have the dorsal vagal complex, which branches out towards the back of our body. And I don't know that it necessarily matters of where it is. It's just the name of it, the ventral and the dorsal. And the third pathway is the sympathetic fight or flight response. And I think we're very familiar with that. We've heard about it in evolutionary psychology and just how animals respond to their environment. This fight or flight response, they don't necessarily have these higher level cognitive thinking. They just respond for survival. But this ventral vagal complex is what allows us to feel safe. That's the first pathway, which in turn allows us to be social. And physically, we feel regulated. Our heart rate is regulated. We may feel peaceful and are able to engage and socialize with people, give them eye contact and be there for them and be there for ourselves. The sympathetic response, the fight or flight, our heart races, and we have an adrenaline surge, and we have shallow breathing. And fight or flight, for the most part, was something that I never really identified myself with. But when I started to think about it differently, was this might look like snapping at people around you, like snapping at your partner, your husband, your kids. That is the sympathetic response of fight or flight. And the one that really got me was the dorsal vagal complex. It was one that I hadn't heard of before, and that was the freeze response. And I learned that it was one of the older evolutionary responses of, animals out in the wild just freezing for survival, not necessarily fighting or fleeing. So if I very much identified with that response because it was something my husband and I talked about a lot, how I couldn't respond to him at the end of the night, that my breathing was so shallow that I could barely get through reading time with my son. We would go to bed and I'd have to read a story and I could barely get through the words in the story. And even after that, I just couldn't connect with my husband. It would just, this breathing just really limited me. So that's what it is and sort of how it's related to motherhood in my experience.
Mm-hmm. And it's possible to go through all those different sort of levels, even in one day. So just know that as well, that it's very normal. It's not necessarily that like, oh my gosh, you're going to have these responses all the time, but it's very normal. So it's really good to be aware of the fact that there are these different levels to our nervous system and how do we get into or back into that sort of social engagement where we're really just in this nice, calm, peaceful, socially engaged state. So let's move in a little bit to the sensory processing chat and sort of how it relates to motherhood in terms of what might this look like? What might sensory overload or even underwhelm, under responsiveness, right, to sensory input? Because there's different levels of either over responding or under responding to sensory input. And what might that look like in those first few years of motherhood to just give a sense to moms of what they can start to look out for during the day?
Yeah, so I think before talking about overwhelm and underwhelm, just briefly what sensory processing is the way our brain processes sensory information from our environment. I think we're very familiar with the five senses, and we have some additional ones like vestibular, proprioception, and interoception, which has to do with movement and our ability to feel inside our bodies. And everyone has a very individualized way to process sensory information, which could be contributed by genetics. So some people are born in certain ways to react with their environment. And some of it is contributed by traumatic stressors. So if somebody has a history of stressors in their life, their body habituates in responding a certain way to their environment. So someone can inherently be sensitive to noise and touch and seek movement like vestibular and proprioceptive movement, or seek high intensity movement like roller coasters, or even liking spicy food. That would be one example of high intensity flavor. So in motherhood, as individuals, we may have already brought in our personal sensory preferences, and added to that is our hormonal and environmental changes. So our sensory preferences may change, or they may be enhanced or triggered more because of this new environment with the baby. So we have more items in our environment. So visually, we might be overstimulated. There's more noises, the baby crying. And I think we are wired to be more hypervigilant because we need to be responsive to our crying babies. And more smelling. I thought about this more recently of like, we also have to be acutely aware of smells. Like, did my baby just poop? So that they're not sitting in their, in their pooper too long. So we've become so acutely aware of our senses that at some point we might hit a threshold that is above what we're used to and become overwhelmed.
I think for me, my own sort of overwhelm in motherhood was this feeling of being touched out by the end of the day. So that when my husband came home, I literally was like, do not touch me. Do not like come near me. I just need my own space with nobody attached to me. Like, just leave me alone. And that was really hard because he's like, but wait a second. Like, I used to be number one and now you don't want to have anything to do with me. And so that initially caused a little bit of strife in our marriage. And for me, also, initially, I was like, I don't understand why at the end of the day, I like want to have nothing to do with him. But as you start to think about it more, you're like, okay, it makes sense. I'm nursing however many times during the day, or I'm baby wearing, or I'm burping, or I'm, picking up and putting down for sleep. And you're constantly being touched. And if you have a toddler and a baby, then you've got hands grabbing at you all the time. So for me, that was my big thing. And I also found that the auditory piece, there comes a point where you're like, I can't deal with this crying anymore. Right? Like,
Right.
I'm just done. So I
Yes.
think that's important for parents to know that this is all common to have this sense of overwhelm. And I don't consider myself as somebody who had tactile sensitivity before having children or that over registering of tactile information. That never really bothered me. But when it's constant 24 hours a day, it just is too much for my nervous system. And this is also then why we have to be aware of it so that we can do something about it.
Right. Yeah. And I think you also mentioned, so this is us describing overwhelm, but there's also the underwhelm. I think you mentioned, and I thought you're absolutely right. And I think that has to do, it is related to this overstimulation because our nervous system can also shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And when our nervous system shuts down, we're no longer responsive to
Mm-hmm.
things. And that's when depression comes in. And that's when, somebody needs to seek help because now you're under responsive to cries, you're under responsive to
Mm-hmm.
people that need you. So the underwhelm isn't necessarily related to like I'm not registering the sensory cues. It's now like a second step or this trajectory of like I've been overwhelmed and now I'm at this point of
Mm-hmm.
shutdown.
Yeah, exactly. And that's that freeze state where we've just gone too far
Yes.
past our sort of just right threshold. I think that's so important to mention because it is so easy to flip from the I'm overwhelmed to now I'm shut down. And I think it's important to realize for us moms, but it's also really important to realize that our babies have this also. And, just being aware that sometimes it is just this balance of how do we have appropriate stimulation during the day and how do we have times for rest and just kind of a reset. I want to take a moment and let you know about my book, Mothering from Within. Like a good friend, therapist, and mentor, this book offers guidance and support to help you navigate motherhood with intuition, grace, and yes, a bit of humor. It's full of evidence-informed, developmentally appropriate, attachment-focused information on developmental milestones, baby sleep, reflux, feeding, mama mental health, and so much more. To grab a copy, check out the link in the show notes below. Okay, so I would love to chat a little bit about maybe some of these ways that we can help to reset our nervous systems or our sort of sensory processing abilities. How can we use different tools to bring our arousal level down?
Yeah. So, I mean, we have these tools as occupational therapists that we've learned that works with kids. And just knowing the premise of that helps us know how we can support ourselves. And it might look a little different. And sometimes we can even use the same tools that we use for kids or babies. For example, being in a rocking chair. We think about being on a rocking chair to soothe our baby, but really it's soothing us as well. We might fall asleep and it's really helpful for us to calm our nervous system. And another one is going for walks on a stroller. If you can't really take a break away from your child, you can put a child in a stroller and go for a walk. And that linear movement related to vestibular input can really be soothing. And baby wearing is another one. Again, I know there's moms that don't have opportunities to stay away or not be touched by their babies. And it's important to have time
Mm-hmm.
with them. So baby wearing provides that deep pressure touch, and deep pressure touch is soothing for the nervous system. I mean, there's research studies about this, but it's pretty self-explanatory that hugs are good for your nervous system. So it's really like a hug for you as a mom if you have a wrap all the way around
Mm-hmm.
you. And yes, your baby's there and you are both co-regulating because now they're soothed and now you're soothed. Some things that moms can do maybe not related to their babies, if they have opportunities to do something for themselves, is engaging in exercise like yoga or anything that has to do with movement, because movement is important. Moms are healing, it has to be gentle, but activating the muscles is really soothing. And having time for quiet breaks, maybe asking for help and saying, I need 10 to 20 minutes in a quiet room by myself. And then maybe even at the end of the night when we're just really up there in our nervous system is, finding time to, drink a hot tea very slowly and being mindful of our nervous system coming down, or taking baths. Baths can really be soothing for the skin if it's warm water, if you have some aromatherapy. So those are calming for the senses, the smell, the feeling. So those are some examples, and I'm sure there's more that people can think of based on the premise.
Well, and I think this is so important. I love all those examples because those are all examples of self-care and taking care of yourself and prioritizing yourself. And that's so important for our emotional well-being as well as our sensory processing and our nervous system. So now you can see, hopefully, that this, quote unquote self-care, I don't love that term. I think it has sometimes a negative connotation. It's like one more thing on our to-do list. But when we can reframe it as like actually taking care of ourselves, and now we're reframing that even one step further, this is taking care of our nervous system. And this is going to help our overwhelm in the first few years of motherhood. Then it becomes a whole new priority on our quote unquote to-do list. And it becomes a big priority because now you can see that when we can take care of our nervous system and we come out of that fight or flight stress system, when we come out of that freeze state, we can parent on a whole different level. We can parent the way that we always dreamed and imagined that we would be as a parent. We have more resources available internally to be patient, to be calm, to, have this loving bond with our baby when we are out of that overwhelm. So I think that's such a big, important piece of this, is that those sensory strategies seem so simple. Moms are like, oh yeah, I've heard about taking a bath and all this stuff, but I don't have time. But actually, it's really important that you make the time, because this will help you to feel calmer, to feel better, to feel more joy in motherhood.
Yeah, and I would add two things to that. So it's important to take that time. And I do hear sometimes that moms just don't have the time, and I do want to honor that, of
Mm-hmm.
like, maybe they don't have the people that can support them to take those breaks. And that's why I include the stroller walking, the baby wearing, the rocking in a rocking chair, because if they can do those things with their baby and reframe that that's also for them,
Mm-hmm.
then they could feel like, I've rejuvenated myself and I've taken care of my nervous system. And then the other thing is, I think could be motivating for moms, is that as you learn your own nervous system and what helps you and what sensory things help you be calm, you learn that for your kids,
Mm-hmm.
because your kids will become these very individual humans. Like I mentioned, we all come with very unique sensory preferences. And as you learn that for yourself, you can start to see how the preferences are similar, different with your kids, and how you can address them, and how you can empathize, and how you can be a better parent. So
Yeah.
I think those are some other motivating reasons for moms to get to understand this for themselves.
I love that. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I have a few last minute sort of rapid fire questions. The first question is,
Okay.
what is your favorite way to prioritize taking care of yourself during the day or the week?
I would say there's two must things for me, is that I need to get out. I work indoors, I either work at home or I teach, or I'm indoors observing kids and, doing occupation. I definitely just feel like, if I feel like I haven't been outdoors, I will go for a walk. I will walk by myself. I will walk with my dog. I will take my child for a walk, ride their bike. Like, I just need to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that getting out provides so many sensory experiences that are calming.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one thing. The other one is exercise. So even though the walking could be considered exercise or not, I think it just depends on the person. I really need intense physical muscle activation.
That deep pressure.
So I need to either go for a run, I need to cycle. I've made it a priority because it's hard as a mom to like do exercise. So I knew that I couldn't get out of the house that easily anymore. So I brought in a bike, not only in the house, but in my bedroom so that it could visually cue me that this is something I need
Mm-hmm.
to do. So it's there, it's accessible, and it reminds me that that's something that I need for myself.
I love it. And that's wonderful that you put it in your bedroom so you just see it every single day. Nice. Okay, what is one unique or fun thing about you?
I think I've always had something going on with my nervous system, and I always wished I was more interesting. But I guess you could say that I love dancing. I used to dance when I was in high school, and I wish that I was put in dance when I was younger. I love to dance even now. I dance with my son, and he loves dancing too. We have dance parties.
Oh, that's a great one. What is one piece of advice that you got in your first few years of motherhood that really stands out for you?
One piece of advice. I didn't get a lot of advice. But one thing that I learned in the process,
Mm-hmm.
I can't emphasize enough how important it is to join a group of moms that are going through exactly what you're going through at that time. I was
Mm-hmm.
so lucky to find a group of moms, and there was 11 of us, which I think is a big number. And we're still friends today. Our kids are now 6 years old, and some of us have two kids. Some of us stayed with one. We just had one mom that had their third baby.
Nice.
And I feel like that is the most important thing you can give yourself is be surrounded by women
Mm-hmm.
who are going through the same thing that can empathize with you with the lows and that can celebrate with you with the highs and
Mm-hmm.
problem solve the everything in between because there's so many things that are going to come along the way that is just very unique, and I think that having that support is very important.
Oh, I love that. Okay, if you had a magic wand, what would you use it for and why?
If I had a magic wand, oh yes, I have a good one. And it has to do with us as moms. You know, when I became a mom, I realized how our society is not focused around moms and
Mm-hmm.
how crucial we are to humankind and the survival of our future humans. And if I had a magic wand, I would put us at the center of everything. Like we would make the most money. We are the CEOs of all the things, and it's not just about the Starbuckses or the WalMarts or the Targets. It's like those we are that. That is
Mm-hmm.
who we are because we are the consumers. But just an example. But I would put ourselves at the center, give ourselves like institutionally more time to recover after birth and take care of our kids for at least a year, be home and be able to financially support ourselves and not rely on, I mean, obviously families are important, but some moms don't have a lot of financial support. And we're so central. If I could have a magic wand, is giving moms all the money and resources in the world because they're so important.
Yes, agreed. 100%. I love that. Okay, so what is the biggest takeaway that you hope listeners learned today?
The biggest way, I would say that how crucial our senses are, as much as we are so unconscious about it. Things are so automatic for us now, but they have become elevated as we've become moms. So we do need to pay attention to how we're responding to our environment, even unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
And And those three things, the one that you mentioned was take care of yourself, find time to do that. And if you can't, reframe what you're doing with your baby that is self-care, because you're taking care of your senses, and that you're doing this not just for yourself, but is for your ability to understand your child's development and their sensory development.
I love it. Love that so much. Well, thank you so much for being here, Tracy. It's been lovely chatting with you. Can you please let listeners know where they can learn more about you and what you have sort of to offer in regards to this whole sensory world of things?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kylie, for having me. It was really a pleasure to talk to you and be with like a like-minded individual. So you can find me at my website. It's www.momsensorymagic.com. And I do have listed there my services. I do one-on-one consultations, not just with moms, but also with early childcare providers. And you could also find me on Instagram at Mom Sensory Magic.
Love it. And I'll put all of those links underneath this episode in the show notes as well. So thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye for now. Thanks for joining us today on Mothering from Within. If today's chat sparked something inside of you to explore your motherhood journey deeper, the Mothering from Within Collective is waiting with open arms. This program offers an intimate, high-touch coaching journey designed to empower you with the confidence and clarity to embrace motherhood on your terms, free from guilt. Get curious about your parenting values, gain clarity on your baby's sleep, development, and more, with comprehensive courses, one-to-one support, group Q&As, and a nurturing community. This is your invitation to join a community of mamas doing it all their own way, supported, seen, and held. Visit the link in the show notes to learn more about the collective and how we can walk this beautiful path together. Until next time, stay curious, embrace clarity, and let your courage shine.